When kind-hearted farmer James Miller ventured into the woods that autumn morning, he never expected to find someone in desperate need of help. Following the sound of pained cries, he discovered a woman caught in an illegal hunter's trap. Without hesitation, he rushed to free her, carrying her back to his farmhouse to tend to her wounds. Little did he know that the mysterious woman was Sarah Bennett, the reclusive billionaire heiress who had disappeared from public life years ago. As he nursed her back to health with gentle care and honest conversation, something unexpected began to grow between them. But could love truly bridge the gap between a simple farmer and one of the wealthiest women in the world? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The old deed hung in its weathered frame on James Miller's kitchen wall. The paper yellowed with age, but still legible. 3 generations of Millers had worked this land. His grandfather's signature at the bottom, followed by his father's, and finally his own. Each morning, as he made his coffee in the pre-dawn darkness, James would glance at that deed and feel the weight of legacy settling on his shoulders. This morning was no different. He stood at the window, ceramic mug warming his calloused hands, watching the first hints of sunrise peek over the eastern tree line. Scout, his elderly golden retriever, pressed against his leg with familiar devotion. The old dog had slowed considerably over the past year, but his eyes still held that same faithful warmth they'd had since he was a pup. "Come on, boy," James murmured, setting down his empty mug. "Time to earn our keep." The morning air held autumn's bite as they stepped onto the worn porch. James pulled his father's old work jacket closer, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and honest labor that still clung to it after all these years. The farm spread out before them, 40 acres of responsibility, of tradition, of increasingly difficult choices. Scout limped beside him as they made their morning rounds. The barn needed repair. The ancient tractor was more stubborn with each passing season, and the property taxes kept climbing. But this was home. Every fence post, every weathered board, every acre of soil held memories. He checked the chicken coop first, collecting eggs still warm from the nesting boxes. Mrs. Henderson from the general store would take most of them, though she'd been paying less lately, apologetically explaining that the big supermarket in town had dropped their prices again. James never complained. She'd been kind to him after Janet passed, bringing casseroles and sitting with him during those first awful weeks of silence. The thought of Janet still caught in his throat sometimes, even after 5 years. They'd had plans, dreams of modernizing the farm, maybe starting a small organic operation. But cancer had other ideas, and now those dreams lay as dormant as the winter fields. "Morning, Jim!" The cheerful call broke through his reverie. Tom Watson, his nearest neighbor, waved from his passing pickup truck. "You coming to the town meeting tonight? They're talking about those new zoning regulations." James waved back. "Wouldn't miss it. More rules, more restrictions, more pressure on small farms like his." But that was the way of things now. The world moving faster, while places like Miller Farm held on to their slower rhythms. He spent the morning mending the fence along the north pasture, Scout dozing in a patch of sunlight nearby. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, each strike of the hammer a conversation with the past. His grandfather had taught him this work, showing him how to test the wood's strength, how to drive nails true, how to build things that would last. The local kids thought he was strange, this quiet man who chose physical labor over modern convenience. Even his sister Sarah, on her rare visits from Boston, gently suggested it might be time to sell. "You could get a good price," she'd say, "maybe move somewhere easier to manage." But they didn't understand. This wasn't just land. It was a promise. A promise to his grandfather, who'd mortgaged everything he owned to buy these acres during the Depression. A promise to his father, who'd worked second jobs in winter to keep the farm going. A promise to Janet, who'd seen the beauty in this life and chosen to share it with him. The sun climbed higher, and James straightened, his back protesting the movement. Scout lifted his head, ears perking up at a distant sound. Probably deer moving through the woods. They'd been more active lately, preparing for winter. He needed to head into town soon, pick up supplies and check his mail at the post office. Bills, mostly. The kind that made his stomach tighten, and his mind turned to the small lockbox in his bedroom, where he kept the deed and what remained of his savings. Each month, the numbers aligned a little less comfortably, but for now, there was work to be. And done. James patted Scout's head, adjusted his worn baseball cap, and moved on to the next task. The world might be changing, but here on Miller Farm, there was still value in doing things the old way, with patience, with care, with the understanding that some things were worth preserving no matter the cost. The morning wore on, each task flowing into the next with the rhythm of years. And if James occasionally paused to look toward the woods, something tugging at the edges of his awareness, he couldn't have explained why. Some days were just like that on the farm. The quiet, anticipation of change hanging in the air like the promise of rain. The sun had barely crested the tree line when Scout's behavior changed. The old dog's ears pricked forward, his arthritic body suddenly tense. James had been checking the property's eastern boundary, where fallen leaves had clogged the drainage ditch. He straightened, watching his companion carefully. In 30 years of farming, he'd learned to trust an animal's instincts. "What is it, boy?" A sound carried on the morning air. Faint, almost lost in the rustling leaves. James might have missed it if he hadn't been paying attention, but there it was, again, a cry human and filled with pain. "Hello?" he called out, already moving toward the sound. Scout limped ahead, leading him deeper into the woods that marked the edge of his property. The morning mist still clung to the ground, wrapping around the tree trunks like ghostly fingers. The cry came again, closer now, accompanied by the sound of metal scraping against metal. James quickened his pace, pushing through dense underbrush. Scout whined, nose pointing toward a small clearing ahead. What James saw there stopped him. Cold. A woman lay on the ground, her leg caught in the cruel jaws of an illegal hunter's trap. The device was barbaric, all rusted metal and sharp teeth, the kind that had been banned decades ago. Blood stained the leaves around her, and her face was pale with shock and pain. "Dear God," James breathed, approaching slowly to avoid startling her. "Ma'am, try not to move, I'm here to help." Her eyes snapped to his face, dark eyes filled with fear and something else. Defiance, maybe. She tried to push herself up, then fell back with a gasp of pain. "Stay back," she warned, voice hoarse. "I'm fine. I can handle this." James noted her clothing, expensive but practical hiking gear, now torn and bloodied. She wasn't dressed like a local, and he didn't recognize her face. A tourist, maybe, who'd wandered off the marked trails. "That trap could have severed an artery," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady, the way he might approach an injured animal. "I know how to release it, but you'll need medical attention." She shook her head sharply. "No hospitals, no authorities. Please." The plea caught him off guard, but James had learned long ago not to judge. People had their reasons for keeping to themselves. Lord knew he had his own. "Let me at least free you and take care of that wound," he offered. "I have medical supplies at my farmhouse. It's your choice what happens after that." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding perhaps, or at least a temporary trust. She nodded once, her jaw clenched against the pain. James examined the trap carefully. The mechanism was old, but surprisingly well maintained, not some forgotten relic, but something recently placed. He filed that information away for later. "This will hurt," he warned, "but I'll be as quick as I can." He positioned his hands on the spring mechanism, muscles tensing. On 3, 1, 2. He moved on 2, hoping to catch her before she could tense up. The trap's jaws released with a horrible screech of metal, and the woman bit back a scream. Blood flowed more freely now, but James noted with relief that the wound, while nasty, hadn't hit any major vessels. "Can you stand?" She tried, but her Leg buckled immediately. Without hesitation, James scooped her into his arms. She was tall but light, and she didn't resist, though he felt her whole body trembling from shock, pain, or both. Scout led the way back through the woods, picking the easiest path. The woman's head rested against James's shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady. He could feel her heart racing through her jacket. "I'm James Miller," he said, figuring she deserved at least that much. "My farm's just through these trees." A long pause then. "Sarah." Just that, no last name offered. Her voice was cultured, hinting at an expensive education. "Nice to meet you, Sarah," he replied, as if they'd bumped into each other at the general store, rather than in these less-than-ideal circumstances. "Though I wish it were under better conditions." She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "You have no idea." James focused on his footing, careful not to jostle her more than necessary. The trap itself he'd left where it lay, but he'd come back later to deal with it. Whoever had set it needed to be stopped before they hurt someone else. Or something else. He'd seen what those devices could do to wildlife. The trees thinned, revealing his farmhouse in the morning light. Sarah's grip on his jacket tightened slightly at the sight of it. "It's not much," he said, suddenly conscious of the peeling paint and sagging porch steps. "But it's home." "It's perfect," she whispered so quietly he almost missed it. And there was something in her voice, a longing, a weariness, that made him wonder just what kind of trouble this mysterious woman was running from. But those questions could wait. Right now, she needed help, and that was something James Miller knew how to give. Inside the farmhouse, James carried Sarah straight to the living room sofa, his grandmother's handmade quilt still draped across its worn cushions. Scout followed close behind, his concern evident in soft whines. The morning light filtered through. Lace curtains Janet had hung years ago, casting delicate shadows across Sarah's pale face. "I need to get my first aid kit," James said, carefully setting her down. "Try not to move that leg." He hurried to the kitchen, where his grandmother's old medical kit still hung by the back door. A sturdy wooden box with brass fittings, maintained through 3 generations of farm accidents and minor emergencies. Inside, modern supplies mixed with his grandmother's herbal remedies. She'd been the closest thing to a doctor the community had for many years. When he returned, Sarah was examining her surroundings with an intensity that seemed at odds with her condition. Her eyes tracked over the simple furniture, the family photos on the mantel, the ancient clock ticking steadily on the wall. "This will sting," he warned, kneeling beside her with antiseptic and gauze. "But infection's the biggest risk with these old traps." Sarah nodded, then caught her breath sharply as he began cleaning the wound. Her fingers dug into the sofa cushions, but she didn't make a sound. James worked quickly, efficiently, the way his grandmother had taught him. The puncture wounds were deep, but clean. The trap's teeth had been sharp, which was actually a blessing. Jagged tears would have been worse. "You've done this before," she observed, watching his hands move with practiced ease. "Farm life teaches you a thing or two about patching things up." He applied antibiotic ointment generously, though usually it's livestock or equipment I'm fixing, not mysterious women in the woods. A ghost of a smile crossed her face quickly, replaced by a grimace as he began wrapping the bandage. "I suppose I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything." James secured the bandage carefully. "Except maybe letting me call a doctor to look at this properly." "No." The word came sharp and quick. "No doctors, please, I can't." James sat back on his heels, studying her face. Fear flickered in her eyes. Not of him, he realized, but of something else. Someone else, maybe. "All right," he said finally, "but you need rest and monitoring. That leg's going to need regular cleaning and rebandaging. You can take my bedroom. It's down here on the first floor. I'll use the guest room upstairs." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will." His tone was gentle but firm. "Unless you're planning to walk out of here on that leg." Sarah's shoulders slumped slightly, the first crack in her composed facade. "Why are you helping me?" The question hung in the air between them. James thought about his grandmother. About all the strays and strangers she'd helped over the years. About Janet, who'd always said kindness was its own kind of wisdom. "Because you need it," he said simply, "and because that's what we do here." Something shifted in Sarah's expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of a truth she'd forgotten existed. She looked down at her bandaged leg, then back at his face. "Thank you," she whispered, and there was a weight to the words that suggested she didn't say them often. James nodded, then stood to gather sheets and blankets from the linen closet. Scout had settled beside the sofa, his head resting near Sarah's hand. The old dog had always been a good judge of character. "I'll make up the bed and get you something for the pain, then maybe some tea." "That would be—" Sarah paused, as if searching for the right word. "Nice. That would be nice." As James moved through the familiar tasks of making someone comfortable, he couldn't shake the feeling that something larger than a chance encounter was unfolding in his quiet farmhouse. The morning's simple routine had transformed into something else entirely, though whether it was sanctuary or complication remained to be seen. Outside, the sun climbed higher, and the day's work waited. But for now, there was just this, a stranger, in need, a warm house, and the age-old practice of offering shelter from whatever storms might be raging in the wider world. By late afternoon, Sarah had fallen into an exhausted sleep, her face finally relaxed after hours of carefully maintained composure. James moved quietly through the house, checking on her occasionally while catching up on indoor tasks. The autumn. Wind had picked up, rattling the windows with the promise of rain. He was gathering her torn clothes for washing when something fell from her jacket pocket, a sleek phone with a shattered screen. James picked it up, intending to place it on the side table when the screen flickered to life. Through the spiderweb of cracks, an image appeared. Sarah, nearly unrecognizable in an elegant evening gown, standing beside an older man in front of a building he recognized from news coverage. Bennett Industries headquarters in Manhattan. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. Sarah Bennett. The Sarah Bennett. The mysterious heiress who'd vanished from public life 3 years ago, leaving behind a corporate empire and countless tabloid speculations. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." Her voice startled him. She was awake, watching him from the doorway where he'd helped her to the bathroom earlier. She leaned heavily against the frame, her injured leg barely touching the ground. "You shouldn't be up," he said automatically, then held up the phone. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Sarah's face tightened. "Would it have made a difference in how I helped you?" "No." James set the phone down carefully. "But it might explain why someone deliberately set that trap on my property." She paled slightly, one hand gripping the doorframe more tightly. "What do you mean, deliberately?" "That trap was well maintained, recently placed, not some old thing left over from decades ago." He moved to help her back to the bed, his farmer's calloused hands gentle on her arm. Someone wanted to catch something, or someone. Sarah sank onto the bed, her composure cracking. "They found me. I thought I was careful, but they found me." "Who found you?" "The people I've been hiding from." She laughed, a brittle sound. "Everyone, really. My father's board of directors, the corporate vultures waiting for me to fail, the press, the fortune hunters, take your pick." James pulled the old rocking chair closer, its familiar creaking a counterpoint to the wind outside. "Why don't you start at the beginning?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting in the quilt. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of long-held secrets. 3 years ago, I was supposed to take over as CEO of Bennett Industries. It's what I was raised for, groomed for since birth. Every decision, every relationship, every aspect of my life was curated to create the perfect corporate leader. Her eyes met his, challenging. "Do you know what that's like? To never make a single choice that's truly your own," James thought. "Of the farm, of generations of millers working this land, something about inherited responsibility. Yeah, I might understand that." Something shifted in her expression, recognition, perhaps, of an unexpected common ground. "But you chose to stay," she said softly. I chose to run. The night before my appointment as CEO, I discovered irregularities in our environmental impact. Reports, deliberate cover-ups of toxic dumping, bribes to safety inspectors, entire communities put at risk for profit. Her hands clenched in the quilt. When I brought it to the board's attention, they tried to bury it. Said it would be handled internally. So you disappeared. With evidence. She gestured to the broken phone. Everything's encrypted on there. 3 years of hiding, gathering more proof, trying to figure out how to expose it all without destroying thousands of jobs in the process. The wind rattled the windows harder, and Scout whined softly from his spot by the bed. James absorbed her words, thinking of the trap in the woods with new understanding. And now they've found me. Sarah's voice wavered for the first time. I thought I was safe here, in this quiet corner of nowhere. I should leave before I bring trouble to your door. You're not going anywhere on that leg, James said firmly. And trouble has a way of finding folks whether they're looking for it or not. Better to face it with help than alone. Sarah stared at him, something like wonder crossing her face. You believe me, just like that? Mom, Sarah, I've spent my life reading weather and soil, watching crops grow or fail. You learn to trust your instincts. He smiled slightly. And my instincts say, you're telling the truth. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, and for a moment she looked younger, less burdened. Then her eyes fell on the phone again, and reality seemed to settle back around her like a heavy cloak. They won't stop looking. Then we better make sure you're healed up before they find what they're looking for. James stood, his decision made. Rest. I'll bring you some dinner soon. As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. James, thank you for not asking for proof, for not treating you like an heiress. He glanced back, catching her small smile. Hard to put on airs with someone who carried you out of the woods, covered in mud and blood. Her laugh, soft but genuine, followed him out of the room. And if his heart beat a little faster at the sound, well, that was something to worry about another time. A week passed in the rhythm of farm life, marked by the steady progression of Sarah's healing. James found her one morning at the kitchen table, poring over his grandmother's garden journal, a weathered leather book filled with careful notations about planting cycles, weather patterns, and herbal remedies. Your grandmother knew her plants, Sarah said, not looking up. Her finger traced the neat handwriting describing calendula's healing properties. She was using traditional medicines long before they became trendy in Manhattan spas. James set a cup of coffee beside her, black the way she preferred it. She believed in working with nature, not against it. Said the old ways survived for a reason. Sarah's leg was propped carefully on a cushioned chair, the bandages now clean and white against her skin. The wound was healing well, though she still couldn't put full weight on it. I feel useless, she admitted, closing the journal. You're out there working all day, and I'm just... She gestured vaguely at herself. James studied her for a moment. Think you can manage to sit on the porch for a while? Her eyes lit up at the suggestion of anything beyond the house's walls. Try and stop me. He helped her out to the wide porch, settling her in the old rocker with a clear view of the vegetable garden. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of approaching winter. Here, he said, placing a basket of dried beans beside her. These need shelling for next year's seed stock. Think you can handle that, CEO? Sarah picked up a pod, turning it over in her manicured hands. Show me? James demonstrated the technique, his work-roughened fingers deftly splitting the pod and freeing the beans. Sarah watched intently, then tried herself. Her first attempt was clumsy, beans scattering across her lap. Sorry, You're learning, he said simply. Everyone starts somewhere. They worked in comfortable silence, broken only by the sound of shells cracking and beans dropping into the bowl. Scout dozed at Sarah's feet, occasionally lifting his head to check on their progress. I used to think I was accomplished, Sarah said after a while, her movements becoming more confident. I could read financial reports in 4 languages, negotiate million-dollar deals before breakfast, navigate boardroom politics in my sleep. but I never learned to do anything real. This is real enough. James gestured to the garden where late autumn crops still grew. Though I suspect running a global corporation isn't exactly finger painting. She laughed, the sound freer than he'd heard before. No, but sometimes it felt just as artificial. Everything was abstractions, numbers on screens, signatures on papers, deals made in sterile conference rooms. She held up a perfectly shelled pod. This I can hold in my hands. See the results of my work. James found himself watching her face instead of his work, noting how the morning light softened her features, how her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. The garden needs winter preparation, he said, surprising himself. If you're interested in more hands-on experience, won't I slow you down? Sometimes slower is better, he smiled. Grandmother always said a garden grows best when you take time to know it. Over the next few days, they fell into a new routine. James would help Sarah to the garden in the morning, setting her up with whatever tasks she could manage from her chair. She proved to be a quick study, her natural intelligence turning to this new challenge with unexpected enthusiasm. She learned to identify different soil types by touch, to gauge the health of plants by their leaves, to save seeds from the strongest specimens. The garden journal became her constant companion, her own neat notes joining his grandmother's on the aged pages. Your tomatoes are undernourished, she announced one afternoon, comparing leaf patterns to diagrams in the journal. The soil here needs more calcium. James looked up from where he was turning the earth for winter. That's so? Your grandmother noted the same problem in 1985. She used crushed eggshells and bone meal to fix it. Sarah held up the journal triumphantly. It's all right here. He drove into town that afternoon, returning with supplies to amend the soil. Something warm settled in his chest as he watched Sarah carefully measuring out portions, her face intent with concentration. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sarah suddenly said, I haven't thought about the board of directors all day. James glanced at her, noting the peace in her expression. Too busy playing in the dirt, too busy living. She turned to meet his gaze, something vulnerable in her eyes. Thank you for showing me how. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then Scout barked at a passing deer, breaking the spell, and they turned back to watch the sky paint itself in shades of gold and purple. But something had shifted, as subtle and significant as the changing of seasons. The business magazine arrived with the regular mail, its glossy cover jarringly out of place among the farm supply catalogues and utility bills. James almost missed it until Scout's morning paper retrieval mission scattered everything across the porch steps. Bennett Industries launches global search for missing Iris, screamed the headline. Below it, a photo of Sarah from 3 years ago, polished, professional, and worlds away from the woman who'd spent yesterday afternoon teaching him about companion planting from his grandmother's journal. James picked up the magazine, his stomach tightening as he read further. The article painted a concerning picture, a $10 million reward for information leading to Sarah's location, private investigators hired in multiple countries, and quotes from Bennett Industries board members expressing deep concern for their missing CEO-to-be. They're getting desperate. He turned to find Sarah in the doorway, leaning on the cane he'd carved for her. She'd been walking more each day, her strength returning faster than either of them had expected. You've seen this? No, but I expected something like it. She moved to join him, settling into her usual porch chair. The company's annual shareholders' meeting is in 3 weeks. They need either me or proof of my incapacity to serve before then. James handed her the magazine, watching as she flipped through its pages with clinical detachment. Your father's were quoted here. Marcus Bennett, loving parent and dedicated chairman. Her voice turned bitter. Did he mention how he helped cover up water contamination in 3 states, or how he threatened to destroy anyone who tried to expose it? No, But he does say he misses his daughter terribly. Sarah's laugh held no humor. He misses his succession plan. The board's been holding him back from full retirement until the CEO position is secured. She tossed the magazine aside. I was never Sarah to him, just the Bennett heir, groomed since birth to take over. James thought about his own inheritance, the farm, its responsibilities, its traditions. What about the environmental evidence? Couldn't you have fought from within? I tried. Sarah's fingers worried at a loose thread on her borrowed sweater. For months before I left, I tried working through proper channels, environmental agencies, regulatory boards, even our own compliance department. But Bennett Industries' influence runs deep. Every attempt was blocked, every whistleblower silenced. She paused, looking out over the farm's autumn-touched fields. The night I left, I overheard my father and the board discussing permanent solutions to the problem. They didn't mean fixing the contamination. James absorbed this, anger settling cold in his chest. So you ran, with every document, every email, every piece of evidence I could download. It's all still encrypted on that phone. She smiled grimly. Dead man's switch. If anything happens to me, it all goes public automatically. Explains the trap in the woods. They can't kill me. That would trigger the release. But if they can prove I'm mentally unfit, force me into protective custody. She left the implications hanging. James stood, pacing the porch's worn boards. The morning's chores waited, but suddenly the day's normal routine seemed inadequate against the weight of corporate conspiracy. We should go to the authorities. Which ones? Sarah's voice was tired. The local police, FBI, every organization has its price, and Bennett Industries can afford them all. Then what's your plan? She met his eyes. Originally? Hide until I could find a way to expose everything without destroying thousands of innocent employees' livelihoods. The company employs over 50,000 people, James. I can't just burn it all down. And now? Now? She looked around at the farm, at Scout dozing in the morning sun, at the garden where they'd worked together. Something softened in her expression. Now, I'm not sure. For the first time in my life, I've found something real, something worth... She trailed off. But James felt the weight of her unspoken words. He understood suddenly that they were balancing on a precipice, between her past and his present, between duty and desire, between the lives they'd inherited and the ones they might choose. The magazine lay forgotten between them, its glossy pages reflecting the morning sun like a warning. Evening settled over the farm like a soft blanket, bringing with it the kind of autumn chill that sent everyone searching for warmth. James had spent the afternoon splitting wood, preparing for the winter ahead. Now he stood at the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, watching Sarah through the window. She sat on the porch steps, testing the weight of the walking stick he'd carved for her. It was a simple thing, made from a straight ash branch, smoothed and polished with care. He'd worked on it during the evenings, shaping the wood, while she read from his grandmother's journal, their quiet companionship becoming as natural as breathing. "Coffee?" he called through the screen door. "Please!" She smiled over her shoulder, and something in his chest tightened at the sight. He joined her on the steps, passing her a steaming mug. The sunset painted the sky in watercolor shades of pink and gold, the kind of evening that usually brought him peace. But tonight, the beauty felt bittersweet, weighted with the knowledge that it couldn't last. "I remembered something today," Sarah said, running her fingers along the smooth grain of the walking stick. "When I was very young, maybe 6 or 7, we had a groundskeeper at the estate, Mr. Chen. He had this little vegetable garden behind his cottage." James watched her profile in the fading light, noting how her expression softened with the memory. "I used to sneak away from my tutors to help him plant things. He taught me about earthworms and soil pH, about how plants need both sunshine and rain to grow strong." She laughed softly. "My father fired him when he found out. Said it wasn't appropriate for a Bennett to play in the dirt. What happened to him? I don't know. I tried to find him after I took over my trust fund, but..." she shrugged. Just another connection lost to the great Bennett legacy. The bitterness in her voice made James think of his own legacy, not of wealth or power, but of connection to the land, to community, to the simple truth of growing things. You know, he said carefully, legacies don't have to be what we inherit. Sometimes they're what we choose to build. Sarah turned to look at him fully, her eyes searching his face. Is that what you did? Chose this life? Chose to stay? Yeah. Could have sold the farm after Janet passed. Almost did. He gazed out over the darkening fields. But this land, it's not just dirt and crops. It's stories, memories, lessons learned the hard way. Felt like throwing that away would be throwing away a piece of myself. But you made it your own, she observed. The organic sections, the restoration projects, you didn't just preserve, you grew. Their shoulders brushed as they sat in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear. Scout lay at their feet, his presence a warm anchor to the moment. James, Sarah's voice was soft. What if I don't want to go back? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. James set his coffee down, turning to face her fully. Then don't. It's not that simple. Why not? She gestured with her mug toward the distant horizon. There's a whole corporation out there. Thousands of jobs depending on stable leadership. There's environmental damage that needs to be exposed and fixed. There's my father's network of influence, the board's threats, Sarah, he covered her hand with his, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers. I'm not asking about all. With that, I'm asking about what you want. She stared at their joined hands, her breath catching slightly. I want... Her voice faltered, then strengthened. I want mornings in the garden, evenings like this, work that matters, measured in growing things and helping things heal. I want... She looked up, meeting his eyes, and the world seemed to pause around them. James felt his heart thundering in his chest as he slowly, carefully, raised his free hand to brush a strand of hair from her cheek. The moment stretched, fragile as spider silk in morning dew. Sarah leaned almost imperceptibly into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. The distance between them seemed to shrink of its own accord, the evening air thick with unspoken words. Then Scout barked sharply, leaping to his feet. Headlights swept across the yard as a car turned into the long driveway, shattering the moment like glass. The diamond engagement ring caught the last rays of sunlight as it rolled across James's kitchen table, finally coming to rest beside an empty coffee cup. The man who had placed it there, Andrew Preston III, according to his eloquent introduction, sat with the kind of practiced ease that spoke of generations of privilege. You must understand, Sarah, he said, his cultured voice carrying just the right note of concern. Everyone is worried sick about you. Your father, the board, our families. He paused meaningfully. Your fiancé, ex-fiancé, Sarah corrected. Sharply, she stood by the sink, arms crossed, as far from the ring as the small kitchen would allow. An arrangement you and my father made without my consent, as I recall. James leaned against the doorframe, watching the exchange with outward calm that belied his inner tension. Scout lay at his feet, hackles slightly raised, sharing his unease about their unexpected visitor. An arrangement, Preston continued, smoothly, that would have merged two of the most powerful families in American industry. Think of the good we could have done together. Sarah's laugh held no humor. Good, like covering up toxic dumping or bribing safety inspectors. Alleged improprieties that could have been handled internally, my dear. Preston's smile didn't reach his eyes. Instead, you chose to run away with corporate secrets, leaving chaos in your wake. Do you know what the company's stock has done in your absence? I know exactly what it's done. Sarah's voice was steel. I still get the reports. The board's been artificially inflating the price to hide the impact of their environmental violations. Another thing I have proof of. Preston's smile slipped for just a moment. He reached into his expensive suit jacket, withdrawing an envelope. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of James. Ah, yes, your rescuer. Preston's gaze swept over James's work clothes and calloused hands with calculated dismissal. How fortunate you were there when Sarah had her accident. The way he said accident made James's jaw tighten. Not fortune. Someone set that trap, deliberately. A serious accusation. Preston's tone suggested it was anything but. Though I understand such devices are common in rural areas, hunting and such. Not on my land. James straightened from the doorframe. And not that kind of trap. Preston waved a manicured hand dismissively, turning his attention back to Sarah. Your father is prepared to be generous, despite everything. Full reinstatement as CEO in waiting, all allegations forgotten, the environmental concerns addressed through proper channels. He tapped the envelope. And of course our engagement would proceed as planned. Sarah went very still. And if I refuse, then unfortunately, the board will have to consider more aggressive options. Preston's voice hardened. That phone of yours, the one with all your supposed evidence, it's corporate property technically. Taking it could be considered theft. And in your current fragile mental state, is that a threat? James took a step forward, but Sarah raised a hand to stop him. It's how they work, she said quietly. Threats wrapped in concern, corruption disguised as business as usual. She moved to the table, picked up the ring. Its facets caught the light like shards of ice. I wore this for 6 hours before I realized I couldn't breathe. 6 hours of smiling for photographs, accepting congratulations, playing my part in the great Bennett-Preston alliance. She set the ring down precisely in front of her ex-fiancé. I'm not that person anymore. No, Preston agreed, his cultured veneer cracking slightly. You're certainly not. Living in this, he glanced around the farmhouse kitchen with barely concealed disdain, charming rustic setting, playing at being common. Tell me, Sarah, do you really think you belong here? That you can just leave behind everything you were born to be? Born to be? Sarah's voice rose. I was born a person, Andrew, not a corporate asset, not a bargaining chip, not your perfect socialite wife, a person with choices and dreams and what? A future with him. Preston jerked his head toward James. Don't be naive, Sarah. Look at him. Look at this place. How long before you tire of playing farmer's wife? How long before you miss the life you were meant for? James watched Sarah's face, his heart hammering. He hadn't realized until this moment how much he dreaded her answer, how much he feared. Preston's words might reach some hidden part of her that longed for her old life. But Sarah was smiling, a real smile that transformed her entire face. You still don't understand, do you? This life, the one you're so dismissive of, it's more real than anything I had in your world. Here, I'm not the Bennett heiress or your future wife. I'm just Sarah, and that's who I choose to be. Preston's facade cracked completely. He stood, gathering the ring and envelope with sharp movements. Your father warned me you'd become unstable. Consider carefully, Sarah. You have 48 hours to accept our offer. After that, he straightened his tie with practiced precision. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that. He strode out without another word. Through the window, they watched his luxury car disappear down the drive, leaving only dust and tension in its wake. Night had fallen by the time Preston's dust trail settled. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, her father's letter trembling slightly in her hands. James had given her space after their unwelcome visitor left, busying himself with evening chores. But now he watched her from the doorway, concern etched on his features. He'll expect me to read it, she said without turning. My father always did love his letters, said they carried more weight than phone calls or emails, something about the permanence of ink on paper. She broke the heavy wax seal, the Bennett family crest, James noted, and unfolded the expensive stationery. Her eyes scanned the pages, face growing harder with each line. Want to talk about it? James asked quietly. Sarah turned, letter still clutched in her hand. You deserve to know everything. The whole truth, not just pieces. Only if you want to tell it. She smiled faintly at that, at his consistent respect for her choices. Moving to the living room, she settled into what had become her usual spot on the sofa. James followed, taking the old armchair across from her. "I was 8 when my mother died," she began, smoothing the letter across her lap. "Cancer. Fast and brutal. The last thing she made my father promise was that I would be taken care of, that I would have the best of everything." A bitter laugh escaped her. He took that to mean the best education, the best connections, the best preparation to take over the company. Love never entered into it. James stayed quiet, letting her find her way through the story. By 12, I was sitting in on board meetings. By 16, I was analyzing quarterly reports and attending shareholder dinners. Dating was vetted through corporate HR, only sons of suitable families considered. She gestured to the letter. Andrew was the perfect choice. Preston Industries had the right combination of assets and market share. Our marriage would have created an empire. "But you found something," James prompted gently. "I found everything." Sarah's voice hardened. 3 years ago, an employee in our environmental compliance division committed suicide, left a note saying he couldn't live with what he knew. I started digging, quietly at first, then with increasing desperation as I uncovered more and more evidence. She stood, pacing the room with restless energy. Chemical dumping in water tables across 3 states. Falsified safety reports. Bribes to keep locals quiet about increased cancer rates. And my father, the board, they knew. They all knew. "The phone," James said. "That's what's on it?" Sarah nodded. "Everything. Documents, emails, surveillance footage, witness statements. Enough to bring down not just Bennett Industries, but half the corporate structure on the East Coast. The night before my CEO appointment, I confronted my father with it all." She stopped pacing, hugging herself as if against a chill. He laughed, actually laughed, said I was naive, that this was how business worked in the real world. Then he told me what would happen. I would take my position as CEO, marry Andrew, and these minor issues would be handled internally. But you ran instead. I couldn't be part of it, couldn't put my name, my life behind that kind of evil. She met his eyes. So I ran. Took everything I could download, set up the dead. Man switch and disappeared. Spent 3 years moving from place to place, gathering more evidence, trying to figure out how to expose it all without destroying the thousands of innocent employees who depend on the company. James absorbed this, thinking of the trap in his woods with new understanding. And now they're closing in. They've always been closing in. Sarah sank back onto the sofa, suddenly looking exhausted. I let myself forget these past weeks, let myself believe I could have this. She gestured around the farmhouse at their quiet life, instead of that fight. Standing, James moved to sit beside her. Carefully, giving her every chance to pull away, he took her hand. Her fingers curled into his immediately, seeking anchor. "Sarah," he said softly, "who says you can't have both?" She looked at him, really. Looked at him and something shifted in her expression. "Both? The truth deserves to come out. Those people deserve justice. But you deserve a life too, whatever kind of life you choose." Her free hand came up to touch his face, gentle as morning light. "I think," she whispered, "I already chose." This time, when they drew together, there was no interruption. James's lips met hers with infinite tenderness, and for a moment the weight of corporate empires and environmental crimes and family legacies fell away, leaving only this: 2 people finding home in each other's hearts. The town newsletter lay open on Mrs. Henderson's store counter, its headline impossible to miss: "Mystery Woman at Miller Farm Raises Questions." Below it, a grainy photo showed Sarah in the garden, James beside her, their heads close together, over what was probably his grandmother's journal. "People are talking, Jim." Mrs. Henderson's weathered face held genuine concern as she rang up his usual supplies. "Not just here. Had some fancy-looking folks in yesterday asking questions about your guest." James kept his expression neutral as he counted out cash for the groceries. "People always need something to talk about, Mrs. H." "True enough." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. But these weren't regular gossips. Men in suits showing badges that looked awful official. Wanted to know about any unusual activity out your way. Something cold settled in James's stomach. He thought of Preston's threat, the 48-hour deadline that was quickly approaching. What did you tell them? That James Miller's business is his own, and they'd do well to remember folks around here look after their own. She straightened, proud as a queen. Though I'd feel better if you told me there's nothing to worry about. James met her concerned gaze. Mrs. Henderson had been like a second mother since Janet's passing, bringing food, checking on him during bad weather, keeping him connected to the community when grief threatened to isolate him completely. Sarah's a friend who needed help, he said carefully. That's all anyone needs to know. A friend, is it? Mrs. Henderson's eyes twinkled knowingly. Must be the way you look at her. Reminds me of how you used to look at Janet. God rest her soul. The comparison struck him silent. He hadn't allowed himself to think about it in those terms, hadn't wanted to examine too closely the way his heart lifted whenever Sarah smiled. Mrs. Henderson pressed a paper bag into his hands. Fresh cookies from the smell of them. Be careful, Jim. Something about those men felt wrong, like they weren't really what they claimed to be. Back at the farm, James found Sarah in their now familiar routine. She sat on the porch, consulting the garden journal while Scout dozed at her feet. But today, her posture was tense, her eyes fixed on a point in the distance. They're watching. The farm, she said without preamble. Black SUV parked on the Ridge Road for the past hour. Government plates, but they're not government. James set the groceries down, moving to stand beside her chair. Bennett Industries? Probably. They like to hire ex-federal agents. Gives them an air of legitimacy. She looked up at him, worry clear in her eyes. It's not safe for you anymore. James, I should go. No, the word came out sharper than he intended. Softer, he added. We'll figure this out together. I won't let them hurt you. Her hand found his, squeezing tight. Any of you, this town, these people, you've all been so kind. You deserve better than getting caught in my war. Maybe your war needs to become our war. James pulled out the newsletter, showing her the article. The truth is already starting to leak. Maybe we can use that. Sarah studied the grainy photo, her expression thoughtful. The court of public opinion. It's one battlefield my father never mastered. He always preferred working in the shadows. Small towns run on sunshine, James said, remembering his grandmother's favorite saying. Hard to keep secrets when everyone knows everyone. A plan began to form in Sarah's eyes. The town meeting tonight? Everyone will be there, right? To discuss the new zoning laws? Whole community turns out for anything affecting the farms. Then maybe... She straightened in her chair, energy replacing resignation. Maybe it's time to stop hiding. Time to tell my story to people who might actually listen. James watched her, pride mixing with concern. It'll be dangerous. Once you go public, there's no going back. I'm tired of running. Sarah stood, her injured leg now strong enough to bear her weight. And I'm tired of them threatening what I love. The word hung between them, unspoken before this moment. James drew her close, pressing his forehead to hers. Up on the ridge, the black SUV's windows gleamed in the afternoon sun, watching, waiting. The war for truth was about to become very local indeed. The paparazzi photo hit the internet at dawn. Sarah Bennett, long-lost corporate heiress, standing in a farmer's garden with dirt on her hands and love in her eyes. The image spread like wildfire across social media, news sites, and business channels. By breakfast, the quiet sanctuary of Miller Farm had become ground zero for a media circus. James stood at the kitchen window, counting the news vans parked along his driveway. 14 so far, and 3 helicopters. Sarah joined him, her hand finding his automatically. She wore one of his old flannel shirts, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, about as far from her corporate image as possible. I'm so sorry, James. Don't be, he squeezed her hand. We knew this might happen. Not like this. She gestured to her phone, which hadn't stopped buzzing since the story broke. They're calling it a modern fairy tale. The billion-dollar heiress and the humble farmer. Entertainment shows are already casting the movie. Outside, reporters jostled for position, their cameras trained on the farmhouse. Scout paced anxiously by the door, understanding something was wrong, but unable to help. Your father's released. A statement, Sarah continued, scrolling through messages. The Bennett family is overjoyed to learn of our beloved daughter's whereabouts and current well-being. We look forward to welcoming her home. She laughed bitterly. As if I'm a wayward teenager who stayed out past curfew. A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Through the screen, they could see Tom Watson looking worried. Jim? Sarah? Y'all might want to see this. They followed him onto the porch, where the media crowd surged forward like a wave. Tom pointed toward the road, where a convoy of black vehicles was approaching. That'll be the board, Sarah said quietly, right on schedule. James watched the vehicles draw closer, his farmer's patience warring with an urge to gather Sarah up and run. But there was nowhere to run to, not anymore. The photo had seen to that. The lead car stopped, and Marcus Bennett stepped out. He was exactly as James had imagined from Sarah's descriptions. Tall, imperious, every silver hair perfectly in place. His smile for the cameras was practiced, paternal. "Sarah, darling," he called out, pitching his voice to Carrie. "Thank God we've found you." Sarah's hand tightened in James's. "Here we go," she whispered. Marcus Bennett mounted the porch steps like a king ascending his throne. Behind him, Andrew Preston and several board members emerged from their vehicles, forming a practiced tableau of concern and authority. "Mr. Miller." Bennett's smile didn't reach his eyes as he extended his hand. "We can't thank you enough for looking after our Sarah during her episode." James didn't take the offered hand. "She's not having an episode, Mr. Bennett. She's standing up to corporate corruption." A flicker of something dangerous crossed Bennett's face, but his smile never wavered. The cameras were rolling after all. "My dear," he turned to Sarah, "you've had us all so worried. These delusions about environmental violations, these paranoid fantasies about corporate conspiracies." He reached for her arm. "It's time to come home and get the help you need." Sarah stepped back, pulling James's flannel shirt tighter around her. "The only delusion," she said clearly, pitching her voice to Carrie to the gathered media, "was thinking I could trust you to do the right thing." She drew her phone from her pocket, the one containing all her evidence. "Would you like to discuss the cancer clusters in Millbrook County, or the bribes paid to water quality inspectors? Because I have documentation for all of it." The cameras pressed closer. Bennett's smile froze. "Sarah," he warned quietly, "think very carefully about what you're doing." "I have." She looked up at James, drawing strength from his presence. "For the first time in my life, I'm thinking clearly." A reporter called out, "Miss Bennett, are you saying Bennett Industries knowingly polluted water supplies?" Another, "Mr. Bennett, how do you respond to these allegations?" The carefully staged reunion was slipping out of control. Bennett's mask cracked slightly as he stepped toward his daughter. James moved between them, his solid farmer's frame a clear barrier. "I think you should leave, Mr. Bennett." "This isn't over," Bennett hissed, too quietly for the cameras to catch. "No," Sarah agreed, her voice steady. "It's just beginning." They watched from the porch as Bennett and his entourage retreated, their choreographed rescue mission turned to chaos by a daughter's defiance. The media swarmed their departing vehicles, hungry for comments. "You okay?" James asked softly. Sarah looked around at the farm, at the garden where she'd found purpose, the porch where she'd found love, the simple house where she'd found herself. "I am now," she said. "For the first time in my life, I really am." The Bennett family crest ring glinted in the farmhouse's kitchen light as Marcus Bennett set it deliberately on the table. 3 silver wolves circled a crown, a design that dated back to the family's old-world origins when they'd been minor. Nobility instead of corporate royalty. "This ring," Bennett said, his voice carrying the weight of generations, "has been passed down through our family for 200 years. It represents everything we are, everything we've built." He looked at Sarah. "Everything you're trying to destroy." The kitchen had become an unlikely battlefield. Sarah sat at one end of the worn table, James standing supportively behind her chair. Across from them, Marcus Bennett and Andrew Preston faced them like prosecutors before a jury. Two corporate lawyers hovered nearby, tablets ready to record. "Everything." "I'm not trying to destroy anything," Sarah replied evenly. "I'm trying to save lives." "Lives?" Bennett's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "You're talking about statistical anomalies, theoretical health impacts that haven't even been proven." "I have proof." Sarah's voice cut through his dismissal. "Death certificates, medical records, soil samples, first-hand accounts from families who lost children to rare cancers. Real people, Father. Not statistics." James watched the interplay between father and daughter, noting how they shared the same steel in their spines, the same fire in their eyes. But where Bennett's determination stemmed from pride and power, Sarah's came from something purer, a genuine desire to right terrible wrongs. "The board has convened an emergency session," Preston interjected smoothly. "Given your unstable behavior and these unfounded accusations, they're prepared to declare you unfit for succession." "Unfounded." Sarah pulled out her phone, sliding it across the table. "Everything's documented here. Every memo, every falsified report, every payoff. Would you like me to start sharing them with the reporters outside?" Bennett's face darkened. "You'd burn down your own family's legacy, everything we've worked for? You burned it down the moment you chose profits over people's lives." Sarah's voice shook with controlled emotion. "The legacy I care about isn't in that ring. It's in doing what's right." "Right?" Bennett stood abruptly, his carefully maintained facade cracking. "You think hiding on a farm, playing at being common, falling for some dirt poor—" He caught himself, but the damage was done. James straightened to his full height, years of physical labor evident in his bearing. "Careful, Mr. Bennett." "Or what, Mr. Miller?" Bennett's smile was razor-sharp. "You'll defend her honor? Fight the big bad corporation? You have no idea what you're dealing with." "No, Father," Sarah interrupted, standing. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. James showed me what real integrity looks like, what it means to work honestly, to care about the land and the people who depend on it." She touched the phone. "One press of a button and every news outlet in the country gets the full story." "You'd be ruined too," Preston warned. "No one would trust the whistleblower who destroyed her own company." "Maybe." Sarah's smile was sad but determined. "But I'd trust myself." Finally, Bennett stared at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, of the strength he'd helped forge through years of pressure and expectations. "The company won't survive this kind of exposure," he said quietly. "Then help me fix it." Sarah's voice softened. "Work with me to make this right. We have the resources to clean up the contamination, to help the affected families, to set things right. The cost would be astronomical. The cost of not doing it will be higher." She gestured to the ring. "You talk about legacy? Let's build on worth having." A heavy silence filled the kitchen. Scout whined softly from his spot under the table, sensing the tension. James moved closer to Sarah, his presence steady and grounding. Bennett picked up the family ring, turning it in his fingers. For a moment he looked older, weighed down by the choices before him. "The board won't accept this easily," he said finally. "The board won't have a choice." Sarah's voice was firm. "Not once the truth comes out. The only question is whether they learn it from us or from the media." Bennett looked from his daughter to James, then back again. His next words seemed to cost him dearly. "What's your plan?" Sarah reached for James's hand, drawing strength from his touch. "First, we come clean, all of it. Then we start the largest environmental cleanup operation in corporate history." She paused. "And we do it in partnership with people who understand the land and its people, starting right here." Bennett's eyebrows rose. A farming corporation? A commitment to healing what we've harmed? Sarah squeezed James's hand. And maybe building something new in the process. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Preston looked like he'd swallowed something sour, but Bennett studied his daughter with new eyes, seeing perhaps for the first time not the heir he'd tried to shape, but the leader she'd become on her own. The mortgage papers spread across the kitchen table told a story James had been trying to ignore for months. Past due notices, final warnings, and now a foreclosure threat. The weight of generations threatening to slip through his fingers. He'd been so focused on helping Sarah fight her battles that he'd let his own war slip away from him. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah's voice was soft in the pre-dawn quiet. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in the quilt from her bed, watching him study the papers for the 100th time. "It wasn't your burden to bear." James ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Besides, we had bigger problems. This is a big problem." She moved to sit beside him, her shoulder touching his. "The bank's calling in the loan. Can't blame them. Small farms are risky investments these days." He tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. "Dad always said farming was betting against nature. Guess I lost this round." Sarah picked up one of the notices, her business training automatically calculating figures. 3 months behind. Would have been fine if the summer crop had done better, or if I hadn't needed to replace the tractor parts, or if... He stopped, shaking his head. "Doesn't matter now. Bank wants their money by the end of the month. I could..." "No." His voice was firm. "You've got your own fight, your own legacy to protect." "James." She took his hand, forcing him to look at her. "Your legacy matters too. This farm, what you've built here, it's not just land and buildings. It's hope. It's healing." She squeezed his fingers. "It's home." The word hung between them, heavy, with meaning. Home. When had this weathered farmhouse become home to Sarah Bennett, corporate heiress? When had her presence here become as natural as the sunrise? "The board meets tomorrow," she continued. "Father's agreed to hear my proposals for environmental cleanup and corporate restructuring, but..." She hesitated. "But they want me back in New York, immediately, to oversee the transition and handle the press." She pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. "They're making it a condition of their cooperation." James felt the words, like a physical blow, though he'd been expecting something like this. "How long?" 6 months, maybe more." Her voice cracked slightly. "They're not wrong. This has to be handled carefully. Jobs are at stake. Communities depend on the company." "And us?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. Sarah stood abruptly, moving to the window where the first hints of dawn painted the sky. "That's why I can't leave. Not like this. Not with you losing everything you've worked for." "Sarah, no, listen." She turned back to him, determination blazing in her eyes. "We could merge our legacies. The farm could become a pilot project for corporate agricultural partnership. Sustainable farming, environmental education, practical research into soil restoration." "Stop." James stood, crossing to her. "You can't sacrifice your mission for this place. For me, it's not sacrifice. It's synthesis." She touched his face gently. "You taught me that real value isn't in stock prices or corporate mergers. It's in nurturing things, growing things, healing things. The board will never go for it. They will, if it's part of our larger environmental initiative. Think about it. What better way to show corporate responsibility than partnering with small farms? Creating sustainable models for the future." Her eyes lit up with possibility. "We could help other farmers too, create a network of..." The screen door slammed open, making them both jump. Tom Watson burst in, out of breath. "Jim! Sarah! You need to see this." They followed him onto the porch. In the growing light, they could see vehicles approaching. Not media vans this time, but local trucks and cars. Dozens of them. "What's happening?" James asked. "Word got out about the bank." Tom grinned. Folks didn't take kindly to them pushing out one of our own. Mrs. Henderson started a collection, then the church got involved, then the school. More vehicles arrived, disgorging neighbors, church members, fellow farmers. Mrs. Henderson marched up the steps, waving an envelope. "James Miller, don't you dare sell this farm to some developer." She thrust the envelope at him. "Community's got your back." Inside was enough cash and checks to cover the overdue payments. James stared at it, speechless. "See," Sarah's voice was thick with emotion. "Some legacies are worth fighting for. All of them." Standing there, watching his community rally around him while Sarah's hand found his, James realized that sometimes losing everything was just the first step to finding something more. Sarah's journal lay open on James's desk, its pages filled with her neat handwriting, documenting her journey from corporate heiress to farm inhabitant. But it was the loose papers stuffed between the pages that now commanded their attention. Threatening. Letters that had been arriving at the farm, each more ominous than the last. "They're not from my father," Sarah said, spreading the letters out. Her fingers traced the elaborate corporate letterhead. "Look at the watermark. It's wrong." James leaned closer, studying the papers. "How can you tell?" "Because I designed the current letterhead myself, 2 years before I left. See this wolf in the crest? The eyes are facing the wrong way." She pulled out her phone, bringing up an image of an official Bennett Industries document. "Someone's gone to a lot of trouble to make these look authentic, but they made a mistake." "So if not your father, then who?" Sarah's face was grim as she sorted through more papers. "Someone who wants me discredited. Someone who stands to lose everything if the truth comes out." She paused, picking up the latest threat. "Someone who knew exactly where to place that trap in your woods." The implications hit James like a physical blow. "Preston, it makes sense." Sarah began to pace, energy crackling around her. "He's not just my ex-fiancé, he's also the head of Preston Environmental Solutions, the company that handles Bennett Industries Waste Disposal," James finished, remembering details from their previous conversations. "Exactly. If my evidence goes public, his company goes down first." She stopped pacing, turning to face James. "The trap wasn't meant to kill me that would have triggered the dead man's switch. It was meant to injure me enough to justify taking me into protective custody while they proved I was mentally unstable." James felt cold anger settling in his chest. "And once they had you declared unfit, they could dismiss everything I've uncovered as paranoid delusions." She picked up her journal, flipping to recent entries. "But they made another mistake. That day Preston visited, he knew details about the trap that weren't public knowledge. Details only the person who set it would know." Running footsteps on the porch interrupted them. Tom Watson burst in without knocking, his face grave. "Jim, you need to see this." He handed over his tablet, showing a news article that had just gone live. "They're making their move." The headline screamed, "Bennett Iris Mental Health Crisis. Sources reveal history of paranoid delusions." Sarah read over James's shoulder, her face hardening. "Preston's quoted extensively, I see, along with a carefully selected handful of concerned former employees who remember my erratic behavior before I left. They're laying the groundwork," James said quietly, "for having you committed. There's more." Tom scrolled down. "They've filed for an emergency competency hearing tomorrow morning." Sarah's laugh held no humor. "Of course, the shareholders' meeting is in 2 days. They need me neutralized before then." She moved to the window, looking out over the farm, where the afternoon sun painted everything in deceptively peaceful shades of gold. James watched her, seeing not the defeated woman Preston wanted to portray, but a warrior preparing for battle. "We have everything we need," she said finally, turning back to them. "The fake letters, Preston's connection to the trap, the evidence of environmental crimes. It's time to end this." "How?" Tom asked. A slow smile spread across Sarah's face, the kind of smile that had probably terrorized corporate boardrooms before she'd left that world behind. Preston's not the only one who can talk to the press. She picked up her phone. And I think it's time the world heard from the real Sarah Bennett. She dialed a number from memory. Hello? Yes, this is Sarah Bennett. I'd like to arrange a live interview. Yes, exclusive. One condition. It has to be tomorrow morning, and it has to be broadcast from Miller Farm. She paused, listening. Because, Ms. Chen, I'm going to tell the world exactly why America's largest environmental solutions company tried to have me killed. James felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. You know they'll try to stop you. Let them try. Sarah's voice held steel. I'm done running, done hiding, done letting them twist the truth. She looked at her journal, at the story of her transformation written in its pages. It's time to show them what happens when you back a Bennett into a corner. Tom grinned. I'll spread the word. The whole town will be here to support you. Good. Sarah's eyes met James's, and he saw in them the same strength he'd recognized that first morning in the woods. Because tomorrow, we're not just saving a corporate heiress or a family farm. We're saving the truth itself. As the sun set over Miller Farm, they began to prepare for what would either be their finest hour or their last stand. Either way, by this time tomorrow, nothing would ever be the same. The business proposal lay ready on the farmhouse table, its pages outlining a revolutionary partnership between Bennett Industries and American farmers. Sarah had worked through the night perfecting it, combining corporate strategy with agricultural wisdom. Now, as dawn broke over the farm, news vans began arriving for what would become either their greatest triumph or their final defeat. They're here, James said from the window, watching a familiar convoy of black vehicles approach. Your father, Preston, the whole board. Sarah stood before the mirror in Janet's old room, adjusting her outfit, a careful blend of her worlds. Designer jeans, work boots, and a crisp white shirt that meant business. Good, let them come. The national morning show had set up in the barn, transforming the rustic space into a makeshift studio. Outside, the entire town seemed to have gathered, forming a protective barrier between the farm and the corporate invaders. Miss Bennett? A production assistant appeared at the door. We're ready for you. Sarah took James's hand, squeezing it once. Together, together. They walked out into the cool morning air. Marcus Bennett stood at the edge of the gathered crowd, his face unreadable. Preston paced nearby, his usual polish showing cracks of anxiety. Sarah! He stepped forward. This is unnecessary. We can discuss everything privately. No more private discussions. Sarah's voice carried across the yard. No more secrets, no more threats. The news anchor, Diana Chen, approached with her microphone ready. Miss Bennett, we're live in 2 minutes. Perfect timing. Sarah smiled as Preston's face darkened. I believe everyone who needs to hear this is present. Inside the barn, the cameras rolled. Sarah sat composed, James steady beside her as she began to tell her story. Not just of corporate corruption and environmental crimes, but of finding truth in unexpected places. 3 years ago, I discovered that Preston Environmental Solutions, in partnership with Bennett Industries, had been deliberately concealing toxic dumping across multiple states. She held up a flash drive. I have proof of every violation, every cover-up, every threat made to silence witnesses. Preston surged forward, but the cameras caught his movement. You can't. I can, and I will. Sarah's voice was steel. Including proof that you arranged an accident to have me declared mentally unfit. She produced the fake threatening letters. Your mistake was using outdated letterhead. Details matter, Andrew. Marcus Bennett stepped into frame. Sarah, think about what you're doing. I have, Father. She opened the business proposal. That's why I've developed a plan to make this right. Not just cleanup, but complete reformation. Bennett Industries can lead the way in environmental restoration, partnering with local farmers to heal the land we helped poison. Diana Chen leaned forward. Are you suggesting a complete corporate restructuring? I'm suggesting a revolution. Sarah's eyes blazed. starting right here at Miller Farm, a pilot program combining traditional farming wisdom with corporate resources, sustainable agriculture, environmental education, real commitment to the communities we've harmed. James watched pride war with calculation on Marcus Bennett's face. The old man was a businessman to his core. He could see the potential even through his anger. "The cost," Preston began, "will be less than the lawsuits once this evidence it goes public," Sarah cut in smoothly. "Choose carefully, Andrew. Your next words might be quoted in court." Preston fell silent, defeat creeping into his posture. "Well, father?" Sarah turned to Bennett. "What's it going to be? Real change or public disgrace?" The cameras caught every nuance of Marcus Bennett's expression as he studied his daughter. Finally, he smiled. A genuine smile that made him look years younger. "You truly are your mother's daughter." He turned to the cameras. "Bennett Industries is proud to announce a new initiative in environmental restoration and sustainable agriculture, beginning with a groundbreaking partnership with Miller Farm." As Bennett took control of the narrative, spinning their defeat into corporate progress, Sarah leaned back in her chair. James's hand found hers out of frame. "Still want to take on my wars?" she whispered. James thought of the community gathered outside, of the future sprouting from seeds of change, of the woman who'd stumbled into his life and helped him save everything he loved. "Always," he replied, and felt her fingers tighten around his. Outside, the sun climbed higher over Miller Farm, warming soil that would soon nurture not just crops but hope itself. The wedding invitation captured everything about their unique love story. Letterpress printed on handmade paper, embedded with wildflower seeds. It combined Sarah's eye for elegance with James's connection to the land. The text was simple, but meaningful. "Love grows where planted with care. Please join us as we blend our lives, our legacies, and our dreams." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and crisp, autumn painting the farm in shades of gold and crimson. Inside the farmhouse, Sarah stood in Janet's old room, now hers, wearing a dress that would have shocked her former social circle. No designer. Label, no expensive silk, just simple cotton lace that Mrs. Henderson had helped her find in a vintage shop. "Janet would have loved this," Mrs. Henderson said softly, adjusting the wildflower crown in Sarah's hair. "Loved you too. You brought life back to this place." Sarah touched the delicate flowers, thinking of the garden where she and James had first begun to fall in love. "This place brought life back to me." Outside, the farm had transformed. The barn gleamed with fresh paint, fairy lights twining through its rafters. Hay bales covered in quilts formed seating areas, and tables made from reclaimed wood dotted the yard. Local flowers filled mason jars, and the air smelled of fresh-baked pies contributed by half the county's kitchens. Marcus Bennett stood awkwardly, in his expensive suit, watching farm hands and corporate executives mingle over coffee in tin cups. "It's not what I imagined for you." "It's better." Sarah smiled at her father. "It's real." The past months had changed them all. Bennett Industries' environmental initiative, centered at Miller Farm, had become a model for corporate responsibility. Sarah split her time between the farm and the city, proving that one didn't have to choose between making a difference and making a life. "The board still wishes you'd run operations from New York," Bennett admitted. "The board's learning to adapt, like we all are." She took her father's arm. "Ready?" The ceremony itself was pure country simplicity. No orchestras or formal processions, just Sarah walking through the autumn grass on her father's arm, while Tom Watson's daughter played guitar. James waited by the garden arch, wearing his father's restored suit and the most beautiful smile Sarah had ever seen. Scout, grey-muzzled but proud, carried their rings on a hand-sewn pillow. The old dog had been failing lately, but he'd rallied for this day, somehow knowing its importance. The minister, who'd known James since childhood, spoke of growth and nurturing, of love that transforms and heals. When it came time for vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the gathering. "I once thought I knew what legacy meant," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. But you showed me that true inheritance isn't in names or fortunes. It's in the way we nurture what matters. You taught me to grow roots, to trust the seasons of life, to believe in the kind of love that makes everything bloom. James took her hands in his work, roughened ones. When Janet died, I thought my heart had gone fallow. Then you arrived like spring after winter, bringing new life to these old fields. You fought for truth, for justice, for this land, but most of all you fought for love, for us. I promised to spend my life growing that love with you. Their kiss was sweet and true, witnessed by both worlds, corporate power brokers and local, farmers, society figures and country neighbors. But in that moment, the divisions melted away, leaving only celebration. The reception bloomed naturally, country music mixing with classical as people danced in the barn. Children played tag through the gardens, while board members sampled homemade preserves. Preston was conspicuously absent, his invitation having been lost in the mail. As evening fell, James led Sarah to a quiet spot behind the barn. An old porch. Swing had been hung there, facing west toward the sunset. "Wedding present," he said softly. "Thought we might need a place to watch the seasons change." Sarah curled into his side, feeling the gentle sway of the swing. "Perfect. Though I hope you don't mind sharing it with a corporate executive who still doesn't know how to shell peas properly. Guess I'll have to keep teaching you." He kissed her temple. "We've got time." From the barn came the sound of laughter and music, their communities becoming one. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, environmental restoration projects to manage, sustainable farming techniques to develop, a revolution in corporate responsibility to lead. But for now, there was just this. Two people who had found each other against all odds, swinging gently in the autumn evening, watching the sun paint promise across their shared horizon. The new sign stood proud at the entrance to the property. Bennett Miller Family Farm and Foundation, growing change since 2025. Its weathered wood and polished brass perfectly captured the blend of rustic tradition and purposeful progress that had transformed the old farm into something extraordinary. 1 year after their wedding, Sarah stood in the garden where it had all begun, watching a group of corporate executives learn about sustainable farming practices from James. These quarterly training sessions had become legendary within Bennett Industries, a requirement for anyone in senior management to spend time working the land they were committed to protecting. "No shortcuts," James was saying, demonstrating proper composting techniques. "Nature has its own timeline. Our job is to work with it, not against it." Sarah smiled, remembering her own first lessons in this same garden. Now the educational center they'd built attracted visitors from around the country, farmers seeking sustainable methods, corporations learning environmental responsibility, students discovering the delicate balance between progress and preservation. The old farmhouse had grown too, adding classrooms and research facilities while maintaining its warm, welcoming heart. Sarah's office, with its mix of soil samples and corporate reports, overlooked the fields where test plots of heritage grains grew alongside experimental drought-resistant crops. "Mrs. Miller?" One of the new interns approached, tablet in hand. "The latest water quality reports are in from the restoration sites." Sarah reviewed the data with satisfaction. 3 former contamination zones now showed normal readings, the land healing under their careful stewardship. Bennett Industries had become a leader in environmental cleanup, their methods setting new industry standards. The sound of children's laughter drew her attention to the teaching garden, where Mrs. Henderson led a group of local schoolchildren through their weekly ecology lesson. The kids loved learning about butterflies and beneficial insects, their natural curiosity flourishing in the outdoor classroom. Quite a change from board meetings in Manhattan. Her father's voice came from behind her. Marcus Bennett had aged, years and months after the corporate revelations, but recently he'd begun to look younger, energized by their new mission. "Better changes," Sarah replied, watching James demonstrate proper seed-saving techniques to his corporate students. though I never expected you to embrace farm life quite so enthusiastically." Marcus smiled, gesturing to his casual clothes. "And work boots. Your mother always said I needed to get my hands dirty more often. Think she'd be proud of all this." "She would." Sarah touched her slightly rounded belly. Still their secret for a few more weeks. New life, new hope, new legacy, growing beneath her heart. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the farm as various groups wrapped up their activities. Corporate jets departed from the local airfield while school buses wound down country roads. Soon it was just family again, the original kind and the chosen kind that had grown around them. James found her on their porch swing, where they still watched sunsets together. "Good day." "The best kind." She leaned into him, breathing in the scent of earth and honest work that still clung to his clothes. "The restoration project's working, the land's healing. Like all of us," he touched her wedding ring, a simple band that meant more than any corporate merger. "Tom says the springs in the North Woods are running clear again. First time in 30 years." They sat in comfortable silence, watching darkness soften the farm's edges. The teaching gardens, the research fields, the newly restored wetlands, all settling into evening peace. From the barn came the soft sounds of the evening crew finishing chores, caring for the animals that were part research subjects, part therapy, assistants for their youth programs. "Did you ever imagine," Sarah asked softly, "that first morning in the woods, when you found me in that trap, that I'd find everything I never knew I was missing?" James smiled. "Maybe part of me did. Some things you just know, deep as roots in good soil." A cool breeze carried the scent of autumn, of ripeness and completion and new beginnings. Soon they would share their news, welcome new life into this place of healing and growth. But for now, there was just this, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had transformed wounds into wisdom,